1 Corinthians 3. As we begin unpacking this, I'm using tonight the New King James Version, and I've chosen this version for a particular reason that I'll hopefully make evident in just a few moments. And there are some terms that have they have time on them, in the sense that they're older terms that we sometimes lose. They kind of lose their usage into our day now, and they're translated differently, that lose some of the impact of that they once carried. For example, there were references in the past to, speaking of God, oftentimes they would use the phrase the Godhead. And it doesn't mean that God has a head. It's a Trinitarian reference by using just one word, Godhead, to refer to the Trinity instead of saying Father, Son, and Spirit. And it was just something that was used. Now it's fallen out of usage. You don't find theologians writing about the Godhead anymore. They use other kind of words to communicate that. And one of the words that we're going to come across is the word that we're going to find is simply carnal. Carnal. And it's one that we don't use anymore unless you make chili with meat in it. It's chili con carne, you got the carnal in it. It has to do with meat. But what we're going to be looking at, though, is the expression of carnality. We don't use that word anymore. I checked other translations that use more contemporary expressions like fleshly, which is technically correct. It's not incorrect. So I'm not suggesting that if you don't have translations as carnal that you have a bad translation. You don't. But sometimes fleshly doesn't communicate very well to us because we don't understand it as clearly as we do with the word carnal. You'll see what we mean in just a moment. So let's begin working our way down through this. Verse 1. Is that my phone?
No, I just turned it off.
Oh, okay. I thought it would maybe been mine, because it kind of sounded like it comes with my hip here. And I, brothers, could not speak to you as spiritual people, but as carnal, as babes or babies in Christ. I fed you with milk and not with solid food, for until now you were not able to receive it. And even now you are still not able, for you are still carnal.
Is that word carnal the same one that they use when they talk about carnal knowledge?
Similarly. Now, it's not what he's using here in that capacity. But he is pointing out something I think is very helpful. Now, in the last chapter we looked at, in chapter 2, we were introduced to the natural man, natural person. Simply, Paul was pointing out that the natural person cannot understand spiritual things because to them they just don't get it, because they are spiritually discerned, or maybe you have a translation that renders it are spiritually appraised. The idea is that a natural person does not understand the things of the Spirit because he can't. Okay, you got that? So we're going to end up with kind of three classifications of people in these early chapters. So you have the natural person that we talked about last week. That's just simply Blow Joe out here, or Joe Blow out here, who is simply an unbelieving man. He may be a good man, he may be a kind man, he may be a horrible human being, whatever. But the thing of it is, the things of the Spirit he will not, and he's not capable of understanding, because he's a lost, fallen human being. You got that? He is not a Christian, in other words. Now, Paul is writing to Christians. And he points out something. One thing earlier, they had a sense of of inflated egos, thinking, at least some of them did, that they were wise, that they were spiritual people. And he's going to deal with spiritual gifts later in 1 Corinthians. So, but he's writing to them. Now, and this chapter is going to affirm this, that they're Christians, but they're still living like pagans, which opens up a very unique dynamic there. That we can wrestle with that in a few moments. We may not have finished this chapter tonight because there's so much in it. And then you will get to where Paul talks about the spiritual person, which he also will later use as himself as an example of what he's talking about. Now, a spiritual person is a Christian that is living like a Christian. He or she is walking with Christ, and they are living a life that is reflective of what a Christian should live. So you have the three kind of people we're going to be in view here. You have first the natural person who's lost, unsaved. Don't expect them to understand spiritual things. They will be confused at Christian things. They will not understand some of the things that we view as very important. They just don't get it. Then you're going to have the second kind of group, which are people who have made a profession of faith and could, not necessarily are, there's wobble room here, but they have made a profession of faith. They're saved, but they're not living like they're saved. And now, when you get to that point, you've got to be very, very concerned and careful, because it's easy for a person to deceive himself or herself. You can do that. You can do that very well. And I used an example of I think it's sometime past, of a roommate I had in college, my first summer in college. And there was three of us packed into a room with no air conditioning. And we had classes and we had work schedules and all that kind of thing for that summer. And he viewed himself as being a very, very good athlete. He just didn't have the tools. He didn't have the physique for it. He didn't have the talent for it. But he just thought he was way up here with the level of his athletic ability. He lasted one summer. When fall rolled around, he was no longer a roommate. Okay, I'll just put it that way. You got to go to class. For some reason, they want you to go to class, and he didn't. He was playing tennis. But he viewed himself, that the point I'm making is, he viewed himself as being very athletic. He wasn't. He wasn't. But he thought he was. What I'm saying by that is, every single one of us is capable of deceiving ourselves, thinking more highly of ourselves than we should, thinking more about our abilities maybe than we should, or maybe even underestimating our abilities. We can deceive ourselves. So when you move to that carnal Christian level, what you end up with there is you can have legitimately saved people who are living in ways that are not Christ-like. But you may have people living in that category that think they're Christian, but they're not. Are you following me there? And we need to be careful about that. I'd be very concerned if someone professes to be a Christian, but they don't go to church. I mean, the church is the bride of Christ. I mean, you see there's a problem there? Or a person who professes to be a Christian but has no desire to read the Bible. Or a person who confesses to be a Christian but has no desire to practice a life of prayer. I'd be concerned about that. That indicates something. And if you are a Christian, but you're not living as one, God will take you to the woodshed. Now, you understand what I mean? He will discipline you if you're His. Now, the frightening part of this category is if He doesn't take you to the woodshed. That indicates something. Does it not? That you really aren't His. Now, not to overplay it or just go too far with it. I disciplined my kids. And I disciplined them in ways that I thought was very fair. And I'm not saying I was perfect at it or anything like that. But I disciplined my kids when they stepped out of line. I could even tell you some funny stories about some of those encounters that we had. It wasn't always corporal punishment, but it was. When you think about human anatomy, God has created and designed us for the perfect place for, the rod of discipline to be applied. Just figure that He has. You don't have to be abusive, but it can be an effective way for some kids. Not all the kids. Some kids there's other kinds of methods of discipline. But you need to discipline your kids. My kids had friends. I didn't discipline them. Why did I discipline them? They were not my kids. I'm just using that as an example. If a person is a genuine Christian and living as a pagan and God does not discipline them, they better be careful. I mean, that should be something to be very concerned about. Because if you are His, He will discipline you. That makes sense to you? So the carnal Christian is a person that just is not simply following the Lord. Matter of fact, what they're living by the standards of the world around us. You'll find their lives look almost indistinguishable from the life of a natural person. Okay? They look just, they act like that, they think like that, they have the same kind of activities, they have the same kind of priorities. That's just what they do. That is a carnal Christian. These Corinthians are carnal. He's going to point it out. He's going to give them directions. First of all, the problem is I cannot give you the deeper things that God has, given Paul to teach, because, well, the same way you don't take a 6-month-old baby and throw down in front of him a T-bone steak. They go at it. Now, the little fella may suck around on it, but he can't eat it. He ain't got any teeth. He can't chew that thing up. You wouldn't do that. You have to give them food as appropriate. He's saying that. To these Corinthians, he's giving them spiritual instruction, Christian instruction, in a method that they can understand, and it's milk. Most basic food he can give them. Why? Because they're not ready for anything more than that. Okay? Well, let's go on a little bit further. Verse 3, as it goes, says, you are still carnal. You may have fleshly there. The idea there is that these Christians were living as if they really weren't. He's going to point out what that looks like. For where there are envy, strife, divisions among you, are you not carnal and behaving like mere men? Look how you guys behave. You envy one another. And we're going to see what that envying looks like when we get a little bit further down, focusing in on the spiritual gifts, of how that was working. There's divisions among you. Those divisions indicate a bent toward carnality or worldliness. Or are you not behaving like mere men? For when one says, I am of Paul, and another, I am of Apollos, are you not carnal? You have your spiritual heroes. Have your spiritual heroes. And your spiritual heroes, it's causing division. Oh, I like what Paul says. No, I really like the way Apollos preaches. He's so good. Paul, not so much, but Apollos, so great. They're on the same team. So a carnal person will pick out someone that they prefer, even though both men are doing what God has called them to do. I had an encounter a number of years ago with a lady who was working at the newspaper in Cahokia. I don't know what I was there for, but I was there probably giving some sort of an announcement in the paper or something. And talking to her there, and she was telling me that she goes to church. You know, you know where Cohokie is, right? And he's part of, you know, it's in Illinois, St. Louis area. Every other weekend, she drove to Tulsa, Oklahoma to go to church.
Wow.
I said, why do you do that? Aren't there a church closer than Tulsa, Oklahoma? Oh, I go to listen to, and she told me the guy's name. I don't remember the guy's name. So she had a spiritual hero. To her, valuable enough that she would drive all the way for, you know, that's a good long trip. And she did it every other weekend to go to church there. Now, we live in a day where we have Christian celebrities. I mean, from a distance, they look so great, so wonderful, and many times until you get up close, you really begin understanding that maybe not as much as once was. We used to have a fella in Southern Baptist circles that was on the Baptist Hour. He was known, wrote several books. He was known, a very influential guy. I'm not going to use his name because this is going to be on the internet, and I might take off his family if I'm not careful. So I'm going to leave him anonymous. Afterwards, you can ask me, and I'll tell you who I'm talking about. But a friend of mine, he's been here 2 or 3 times, Stephen Brubaker. Not our Steve, but the one I went to school with. He led music for a couple of our revivals. He was on staff as a music guy at First Baptist Church, Pea Ridge, Arkansas. And they brought this guy over to do a revival. Okay? So up to this point, he just seen this man from a distance. All of his accolades, all of his accomplishments, and they are quite impressive, to be sure. And Steve never talks bad about anybody. Even when there's people he should talk bad about. He doesn't do it. But he told me, he said, that was the rudest man I've ever met in my life. Because you got to realize that these Christian celebrities put on their britches one leg at a time, just like everybody else. And they're just as fallen as everybody else. But we do have, in some respects, Christian celebrities. You need to be careful with that. I don't necessarily think it's probably a healthy thing at all for Christianity, for churches, for Christians to have certain kind of celebrities that we think are just so fantastic. Because if we spent some time with them, we'd probably discover that maybe they ain't so perfect after all. Just something to think about. But they had a problem with that. That was going on within this church. He goes on, verse 5. Who then is Paul? And who is Apollos? But ministers through whom you believed, as the Lord gave to each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. Now, I really think that we need to not just rush over what Paul's doing here. Paul isn't on an ego trip, is he? Who's Paul? Well, he's talking about himself. Who am I? That some of you think that I'm so good or so great. Who am I? Oh, by the way, who's Apollos? I want you notice how he shifts the focus? Who then is Paul? Who's Apollos? They're just but ministers through whom he believed, as the Lord has given each one. I planted, Apollos watered. I planted the church. Apollos came and instructed, taught the church, discipled the church there at Corinth. But God gave the increase. Where's the focus? God is. God is. That is the focus. We need more of that. We need more of that. In some congregations, you would really wonder if Christ is actually the head of that church, the way things are there. I'm going to be a little bit anonymous. If you want to know more, I can tell you later. about one particular, I'm just going to say it. I don't care about this. Stephen Furtick. You ever hear that name? Elevation Music, if you're into contemporary music. His name is on everything. His name is on everything. It's on the music, it's on the sermons, it's just everywhere. I go to Stephen Furtick's church, some would say, apparently do. There are the children's ministry. Now I saw I haven't been there, but I saw something that's given to the children. It's kind of like a coloring book, also with just brief statements on it, like a first grade reader kind of thing. It's about Stephen Furtick. That sounds more cult. I'd be concerned about that. I don't know anything more about the church than that. I really don't know much about him, other than some major concerns. However, my question is, who is being exalted? Who is being exalted? We need to be. Paul isn't concerned about making sure that he's number one. He's not concerned that he's the one that's getting all the accolades. He says, it's God that gives the increase. I think that is an important focus. The carnality within the congregation is revealed that God is not the ultimate focus. Their special teachers are. He goes on. So then neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase. He just reaffirms it. Almost says it very close to what he just said. God is the one. Don't lose sight of that, Corinthians, or us as well. Now he who plants and he who waters are one, and each one will receive his own reward according to his own labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field. You are God's building. So he uses two different metaphors there to talk about the church there. He uses the first one, an agricultural metaphor. You are God's field. So what that mean, what Paul's talking about? I came and I planted the seeds of the gospel there. And they have started to grow. Then Apollos has come along and he's also tended the field. And it's still, the seeds are now, the plants are starting continually growing. And God will reward each one for his, for our understanding, of course, her labor. That's what he's pointing to there. He goes on. According to the grace of God which was given to me as a wise master builder or wise architect, I have laid the foundation, another builds on it. Okay, I'm not going to get to that last phrase yet. We'll get to that in just a moment. So Paul now he's using the metaphor referred back to the building. When you're building something, building a structure, the foundation is going to be incredibly important. Down where I grew up, there wasn't a lot to use for building materials in a few generations ago. And there are several, and even on my mother's property, there are buildings that have at the corners a stack of rocks, serving to get the building up off of the ground. If you leave a building on the ground like that, it's going to rot real quickly. But you get it up, that air underneath it, it'll last a little bit longer. And there were some house places that you would find the same kind of thing. They didn't have concrete blocks, and bricks were very rare and expensive. So you'd see sometimes houses setting up on stacked rocks. But the thing with that is, that was not a good foundation. With the wet weather and the dry weather and the cold weather and the freezing and thawing, sometimes you see a corner of a house beginning to sink down. because it's not a good foundation. Paul is just using a metaphor there that we all recognize. That foundation is very important. He said, I've laid the foundation. Others have come now and built upon top of it. So it's not a solo project, in other words. Paul's not building the whole thing. Other people are participating. But he's going to switch the metaphor in just a moment from being like this to you and me. And of course the Corinthians. How are you building on this foundation? He's going to deal with that in just a moment. And then he says this. For no other foundation can anyone lay than that which has been laid, which is Jesus Christ. He's the foundation. So how do you know that Peter is not the rock? Because Christ is. He is the foundation. Now he's going to shift to us. He's been talking third person there. Others have come and built on top of it, but now he tells what the foundation is. And by the way, think about that for just a moment. That is the foundation. Not that. He is the foundation. Jesus is the foundation to any biblical New Testament church. He must be. He must be. Can you build a church on other foundations? Yes, you can. Yeah, you can. Are there other possibilities? Well, sure. Probably more numerous than we can even begin to consider. However, the true foundation is always Christ. Now he's going to shift. What are you building on that foundation? Well, what has he pointed out? Now, if anyone builds on this foundation with gold or silver or precious stones, wood, hay, or straw, each one's work will become clear, for the day will declare it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test each one's work of what sort it is. If anyone's work which he has built on it endures, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire. Okay, again, we're going to park here for a little bit. You can. I hope you can see the connection with the earlier statements about their carnality, being fleshly, living more like the world they lived in, as opposed to living as followers of Christ as they should. See the connection there with this here. He talks about building materials. Again, he's speaking metaphorically. He's not speaking that literally you're building with gold or wood. But he's just pointing out something about there are those materials that are superior, and there are those materials that are inferior. The question is, what are you using? What kind of materials are you using? If you take the issue of gold and silver, for example, what does fire do to gold and silver? It melts it, but it also purifies it even more. That's how you purify metals, is you heat it. And then in the sense of precious metals like gold or silver, what's inside that's impure comes to the top, which it can be scraped off. And you can purify gold and silver with that approach. What happens with wood or hay? Well, when it meets fire, what happens to it? Burns up. All it leaves behind is a pile of ashes. So, what kind of materials in our lives are we using as people who are professing to follow Christ? Are we using to build on that foundation, which is Christ? Is it going to? Would it survive fire, or would it not? and I'm not going to go too far with this, but just think about it maybe just for a few moments. What they do is they're faithful to Christ's church. They're faithful in their reading of the Bible. They're faithful in all the Christian disciplines that they can be. I'm not saying they're perfect. I don't say they never sin. I'm not saying that their desire of the heart is to follow Christ as faithfully as possible. And they're building in their whole life. They're building on that foundation. The fruit of the Spirit is obviously growing in their lives. Opposed to a fellow that professes, and I'll just say, take it for as an example, that he has professed Christ, he has actually been born again, but he lives for himself. It's always what he desires to do. And those desires are desires that are shared with those people who are the natural folks out there. He's self-centered. He wants what he wants. He wants the pursuit of pleasure, the pursuit of money, the pursuit of a lot of different things, not necessarily wrong within themselves unless they become idols in his or her life. So he's building a life, but what materials is he or she using to build that life? Will they withstand the judgment of fire? Fire is often used as a metaphor for judgment. It's a metaphor for judgment. Now, the interesting thing for us here with this carnal Christian group here is that Paul says this: if anyone's work is burned, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet as through fire. So that's why he points out that these the carnality that he has in mind, these carnal Christians he has in mind, they are saved, but they have nothing to show for it but a fistful of ashes. And not that we become legalistic at this point, where we think we have to do all of these things and dot all the I's and cross all the T's and live a life that is somewhat burdensome as far as following Christ, but every single human being is going to stand in front of Christ, in front of the Lord God, and be judged. Paul says that. For we all must stand before the judgment seat of Christ to receive what we have done in this world. It's not a salvation issue, you know, about Christians, but it is an issue of rewards. You know, what have you built on that foundation of Christ throughout your life? Have you been faithful, or have you been self-focused? What are you going to have at that point? What's going to be there? Are you going to hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant," or just simply, "You're welcomed in"? It's you're there, you know, but maybe not with what with. I don't want to go too far with this because I'll mess it up, but there may be some, and this is just my imagination, and it could be wrong. There's going to be genuine Christians on that day that are going to be somewhat, I don't want to say sad, but feel at least a sense of they just did not serve Christ as they should have. That's kind of a rough time to find that out at the very end, when there's nothing more can be done as far as the issue of faithfulness. Saved, yes. Wonderful as that is. But not. Jesus used several kinds of parables talking about enter into the joy of your master. The idea of being some elation. And not everyone may not have that same level of joy, of entering into the joy of the Master. I mean, heaven's going to be heaven. Don't misunderstand. But I think indicated in Scripture, there's going to be different levels, as it were, of enjoyment and blessing and all those kind of things. And that's all based on here. What have we done for Him here? And that's what Paul is, I think, pointing to these Corinthians in these opening chapters, wanting them to understand that. Questions or comments or additions that you'd like to make? Or
I have a question.
yes.
When Christ is talking about the Laodicean church, and He says that there will be some that said, Lord, Lord, and He'll say, depart from me, for I never knew you. Is He talking to Christians there, the cardinal Christians?
No,
Not Christians?
I don't think so. I think it's by those, and it's mentioned in Matthew's Gospel twice. It's mentioned in chapter 7 and also chapter 25, where you have there that there many will say to me that day, Lord, Lord, did not we not do this in your name, and that kind of thing. And He'll say to them, depart from me, I never knew you. That's a very important statement, meaning that those people, well, let me use the Matthew 25. You have the judgment of the sheep and the goats. Okay? You know what I'm talking about? You just read the last half of Matthew 25. You'll see what I'm talking about. Judgment of the sheep and the goats. That the master, He's going to come. This great shepherd's going to come. He's going to divide. He's going to divide people like a shepherd separates sheep and goats. The sheep He puts on His right side. The goats He puts on His left. He begins with the sheep. Blessed are you, my Father, for when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was sick, you came to me. When I was in prison, you visited me, etc. When I was naked, you clothed me. They asked Him, well, Lord, when? When did we do these things? He said, when you did to the least of these, my brethren, you did it also unto me. The point being that these people are known by Christ and they're living a life like Christ. And they don't even realize that their little, what they consider their little attempts of being faithful are greatly noticed by God. But then He goes to the goats. He says it's kind of the opposite. When I was hungry, you did not feed me. When I was naked, you did not clothe me. When I was in prison, you did not visit me. When I was sick, you did not come to me. And they say the same thing. Lord, when? When? And what you boil down to, you have goats that think they're sheep. But they're goats. The warning there is, there will be people who think that they are fine with God. They think and believe themselves to actually be Christians that are not. And the frightening thing about that, they think that they're sheep, and they're not. And they're not. Every once in a while, there's a few ministries that work that kind of help in this kind of area, but they'll take, I don't know where they get the materials from. There's churches all over. I heard a pastor, I don't know where the pastor lives or anything like that, but it was just on one of the AFR programs. They were playing part of his sermon, and he was pointing out the really what he felt was terribly unchristian in John chapter 14 verse 6. He said it's okay to say that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, but stop there, because that last part of that verse is really not respectful to other people, other religions, other that kind of thing. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Leave that last part off. And he was giving a defense of that particular belief. He even said, at funerals, don't use that. Stop it. Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Just stop there. Don't put that burden on everybody else that Jesus is the only way. That exclusivity of Christ. That's a problem. Is that man a Christian? I'd rather doubt it. Now, I don't know his heart, but I'd rather doubt it. I don't think you could chop up the words of our Lord like that and be a Christian. Okay? I just don't think you can do that. And he's not alone. There are multitudes of these guys out there and gals that are doing this kind of thing. So the issue and the focus on what you the question you asked, if I'll return to it, is the words that Jesus uses. Depart from me, and here's the key words, I never knew you. That talks about the personal relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. When you're born again, you enter into that relationship. When you're saved, you enter into that relationship. He knows you. We're reassured that all through the Bible, the New Testament particularly. He knows those that are His own. Other questions? Yes?
Can you apply the parable of the four soils into...
Yeah, you can. You can. The parable of the soils, or what we call the parable of the sower, most often called. You have the first type of soil or first type of hearer that is simply, before the seed even begins to root, Satan comes and removes it. Birds of the air eat it up. Second kind almost sounds like a Christian. They accept what is said with joy, but there's no root. It's that they're that hard ground, that dry ground, that it springs up. It looks like they're saved, but then you know what? They're not. Because the heat of the day, they withered away. The next group really are really a surprising group because they almost sound Christian in the sense that they are followers of Christ. They receive the message with joy, but the cares and the worries of this world crowd out the seed and it doesn't grow. The only of the four, the only kind that you actually see is the fourth type of soil. The fourth kind of hearer is a person who receives the message and they produce. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has to produce exactly identical. That's not it. Paul and Apollos had different roles. You had Paul planting the church. You had Apollos watering the church. Okay? So the roles are not always identical, but there is a sense of faithfulness. And God's the one that is the one who's a judge of that. Okay? So yeah, you can apply that. And that's where you find that the problem with and you're thinking of people probably right now, because we all can. We can think of people that they act like they were Christian, maybe even got baptized and joined the church, but where in the world are they? Where are they? They might have even grown up close to you or even in your own home. Where are they? Do they have a love for the Lord? I mean, a real one? Do they love His church? Do they love His Word? Or do they not? Is it the only time they ever go to church is at a funeral or a wedding? Always something to be concerned because folks, this is sometimes I think we almost get ourselves kind of lulled into a state of almost slumber, thinking that but they did make that profession of faith. I've got their baptismal certificate. Surely they. Well, God will sort it out because He's the only one that's capable of doing that. But it's frightening when you start thinking about it. Frightening. But maybe we'll go just a little bit further. The next two verses, and I think I'll conclude after this. Paul does this frequently in 1 Corinthians. Almost a little bit tongue-in-cheek, like, I can't believe you don't know this. I can't believe you don't remember this. Do you not know that you are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? Do you not know that? Aren't you aware of that? It's kind of like, I can't believe the way you people are living and acting. Don't you know this? Now, the word temple is not just the idea of the temple complex. That often the word temple, there's two words in the Greek language that refer to temple. There's one that refers to the temple complex. The Holman Christian Standard translation, which is no longer in print, has been replaced by the Christian Standard Bible. But the Holman Christian does a good job of taking that one word for temple, that means the temple structure and the court around it, the whole thing. And it will translate it the temple complex. That's not what he uses here. He uses the word for sanctuary. Not the outer court, but the Holy of Holies. That's what he's talking about. Don't you know, as a Christian, you are the Holy of Holies. Why are you the Holy of Holies? Because the Spirit of God dwells in you. We don't need a temple anymore because God's people are the temple. He's going to give a word of warning in just a moment. But so you are, by virtue of the Spirit of God dwelling within you as a believer, you are that Holy of Holies. Now, this church is in a ruckus, the Corinthians. And Paul gives a word of warning here. If anyone defiles, that's what my translation says. That's not, basically, it's not simply defiles. It is if anyone destroys the temple of God, God will destroy him. For the temple of God is holy. Which are you? That's a very, very forthright statement.
So it's pretty hard to be carnal over distance of time because you're constantly being beat by the Spirit of God. Your conscience is bothering you. You know you're not living as God has called you to live. So there's something going on that surely makes you awfully miserable.
Yeah. And that's the disciplinary approach of God to His children. Those are His. That's true. And we need to, and that's really a blessing. If God makes you miserable because of your sin, thank Him for that. Thank Him for that, because that is good. That you know you're His. If you're not miserable because of your sin, be concerned. Either you have become so hard-hearted, or you never were His to begin with. There's a lot of directions we could go with this, but we need to be very careful in this sense of knowing that we don't know everything. We don't know every detail. So there needs to be a measure of humility when we talk about these kind of things. But also there ought to be a little bit of sternness in some respects, pointing out that if you really are a follower of Christ, if you've really been born again, then you are going to be a follower of Christ, and you're going to grow in your love for the things that He loves. And you're going to hate those things that He hates. You can't do otherwise. And that's always important that we come to grips with that. Come to grips with that. Of course, he's not done yet. You see there's parts left, but I don't want to move much further. We'll deal with that next week and move into chapter 4. But it really speaks to our day. It speaks to our day when so many And I use the word professing Christians. I do that because I want to just use that as sometimes to differentiate between who a professor and a possessor, who actually is a believer or someone who merely claims to be a believer. When I look across the so-called Christian landscape in the United States or in Britain or in the West, there is much to be concerned about. There's much to be concerned about. When the Church of Jesus Christ, or it claims to be the Church of Jesus Christ, mirrors our culture, those who don't know Christ, do you think we've got a problem? Paul Washer, he's the kind of preacher that he grabs you by the shoulders and shoves you against the wall. He does not sugarcoat things too much. He was recently asked about the church in the United States, and he was asked this question: what do you think is the greatest threat to the church in the United States? Well, he uses church about Christianity, different individual churches, denominations, everything like that. That was the question. His response stunned the person who asked it. He said, the preachers. The preachers. If you've read or aware of the book that Megan Basham wrote called Shepherds for Sale, we've got one in the library. You need to read that book, because she has the receipts that proves that a lot of denominational leaders and pastors and whatnot have been co-opted by the left. And they've done so by using large amounts of money. And that's why she named the book, or whoever titled the book, I don't know if it's she or her publisher, named it or titled it Shepherds for Sale. Just read it. She names names because she's got the resource. I mean, she's got all the information to back up everything she's claiming, and it's stunning. It's stunning. It's stunning when some of those are very well known Southern Baptist or former Southern Baptist leaders, and some of the things that they got involved in, receiving money through other research. You know how they funnel money? So-and-so gives a big lot of money to this one group. This one group gives it to another group. This other group funnels it out, so you kind of lose where the money actually came from. George Soros. The Southern Baptists actually received money from George Soros. If you track it back, you can read it. Now, some of those people are no longer Southern Baptists, but there are some who still are. And what they were doing was just, following his initiative, what he wanted, and they just dressed it up in Christian lingo and called it something different. Off they go with it. So maybe Washer's got a very valid point. Any questions or comments? None at all?